Sauropods are a very distinct and popular clade of dinosaurs that any paleo enthusiast is pretty familiar with. As a symbol of pure majesty and might, these long-necked monstrosities were the largest animals that ever walked on Earth, dwarfing anything and everything around them. Their sheer size alone makes them a striking class of animals that fascinate everyone, both old and new. After all, they are on pretty much every single piece of paleo media we can find for a reason, and of course, gaming is no exception. Dinosaur games were never all that popular, let's be honest, but in the few that we had so far, these big boys were mostly always present. Strategy games, tycoons, hunting simulators, fighting games. However, in the survival genre specifically, they came across with a very peculiar problem. Most titles in this camp try to portray their creatures in an accurate or at least realistic way, and in the majority of cases that works pretty well. But with sauropods, something strange happened. In real life, these behemoths for the most part didn't have any predators once they reached adulthood due to their size and weight, and as expected, most games replicated that. But after years of experimentation and testing, the majority of both developers and players reached the same conclusion. Sauropods are boring to play. Needless to say that there's a minority of people that do enjoy playing as these massive bags of meat, but a considerably large portion of the community that play these games don't, if not most of them. And if this is so widespread even across different titles, that means that there's something wrong with them, or at least there's something wrong with the way they are implemented. So let's explore this topic a little deeper. The basic gameplay concept of these animals is an extremely slow character with the highest size and health of any other member of the game's roster, which offers a more slow-paced, pacifist, and overall calm playstyle. Basically the gamified version of the expression gentle giant. I believe that this is actually appealing for a decent chunk of people, way more people than the amount that actually play them in the Isle or Bob, for example. Back in the day when Pew used to be in the Isle, it would be somewhat common seeing one or two roaming around, but that was it, just one or two people. They simply seemed more common because it was very easy to spot them, but in reality they were barely picked. And why is that? What is the factor that makes people avoid playing as these animals as frequently as the others? And the answer is actually pretty ironic. Sauropod's main appeal is also its biggest deterrent: themselves. Let me explain. The premise of these massive dinosaurs is that once they reach a certain size, they become virtually unkillable, being so tanky and dealing so much damage that literally no carnivore even attempts at hunting them. And that is exactly the problem. Now, obviously we know that everyone enjoys being a raid boss in a video game. We all like the sensation that we are more powerful than others. That's why apexes are so appealing to begin with. It's their strength and status that makes them so attractive to play. But sauropods in specific are so extreme, so above and beyond anything else, that fighting them becomes a futile effort. And there's when the problems begin. With these being multiplayer games, player interaction is at the core of their gameplay. Everything you do involves others or is done to find others. Sauropod's concept, or at least their execution, causes people to actively avoid you on multiple levels. Carnivores don't mess with you because you will win 90% of the time, and herds avoid you because you eat all the food, you can accidentally hurt them or even kill them, and your presence doesn't offer too much protection because you are both too slow to efficiently defend others and too large to the point that your own herd mates need to keep distance from you to avoid being damaged. The way these animals function causes them to be isolated by most of the player base, and even though they may be surrounded by other people, they don't really interact with anybody outside of chatting. And that's what makes their gameplay boring. It's not because they are slow, although that doesn't help, it's not because they take a long time to grow, it's mostly due to their lack of interaction. Path of Titans knew this, so they tried to do something different by adding a Marga, a relatively small sauropod. And while its balancing is questionable on officials, it does perform way better than its bigger counterparts when it comes to popularity. The Isle is also planning on adding different sized sauropods, although their first idea was controversial to say the least. However, those examples don't really count for this conversation, because we are specifically talking about the big ones, titanosaurids and other massive sauropods. We already know that the smaller ones can work with a Marga and even some bigger fellas like a Paro in Bob, although to a lesser extent. The real issue is with species like Pew, Argent, Brachy and alike. But how can we solve it? Is it even possible? So far, no game has managed to do so properly without turning them into AI, and developers are already starting to give up on the idea. Is their concept just fundamentally flawed, or can we do something about it? For us to get to the solution, we need to think outside the box. I believe that the reason big sauropods don't work in games like The Isle, Path or Bob is because we are forcing the wrong gameplay on them. We are applying the same mechanics, rules, restrictions as we do to anything else on the roster, and by doing so, we are setting them for failure. So here's how we can fix this. First, we must determine how exactly we want them to work and the kind of behavior and interactions we wish to promote the most. This may be biased from my part, but I'm pretty sure everyone wants something like this scene: the Diplodocus hunt in Walking with Dinosaurs. This might be the most famous scene of the entire documentary series, and set in stone to many people how we view sauropods and its predation. So let's use this as a basis. Our objective is 1. Promote the formation of sauropod herds, and 2. Make them threatening but still appealing for carnivore packs. And to make it appealing, we need to make the hunt both engaging and rewarding. The reward is obviously a shit ton of food. That's why carnipacks would be hunting them in the first place, so that's already sorted. However, the problem is motivating people to hunt them, which, as we already know, is not the case. To change that, we need to alter a few important components. These gigantic lizards possess ludicrous strength and weight, making it an extremely difficult opponent to take down. And since they are already perceived as raid bosses to an extent, let's actually emphasize that and make their gameplay around that. Before I continue though, please keep in mind that I'm not conceptualizing anything specifically targeted to a particular game. What I'm about to describe is a somewhat vague concept that would need adjustments depending on the title in question, but their basic mechanics and design philosophy would mostly be the same. First, they would begin their journey as one of the smallest hatchlings of the roster, but also with an accelerated growth rate during their initial phase of their life cycle. Once they would reach around 40 to 60% their size, they would begin to grow slower and slower. This way, players would get bigger a lot quicker than other dinosaurs, but they would plateau without reaching adulthood. There's two reasons behind this method. One, their vastly long growth rate would make them extremely vulnerable to basically anything during the detrimentally long period of time, so speeding up the process would allow them to reach sizes where they could defend themselves from smaller predators. However, keeping the rate that high would mean that they would reach adulthood way too quick. So to avoid that, once they become adolescent, they would begin to grow exponentially slower. And that phase is important, because at that age they would be big enough to be invulnerable to things like raptors and other small predators, but still be highly targeted by apex predators or large hunting packs. That middle ground is exactly where we want them to stay the longest, because that's the most quote-unquote balanced state in their lives gameplay-wise. Once they reach adulthood though, that's when the fun begins. Another feature that they would be exclusive to sauropods would be their speed, more specifically their attack speed. The bigger they would become, the stronger but also the slower their attack moves would get, and once they reach their maximum size, their strikes would be slow enough to be avoided even by large predators. At that point, small carnies would pose literally no threat to you, so you wouldn't even need to attack them. They would be just as deadly as they were before, but now large predators have a chance to dodge it if skilled enough. In this way, sauropod players would need to time their attacks well or bait their opponent in order to hit them, and carnies would now have a chance to hunt them consistently if good enough. Hunting them would be the most dangerous challenge for any predator, but it would be feasible, and most importantly, the outcome of the fight would be determined by the skill from both sides. Even with these alterations though, they would still remain a detriment to other herbivores due to their size and food requirements. But since now they will be targeted more often and there's an actual sense of danger, that would motivate them to find other sauropods exclusively to form herds. With these changes, longnecks would still retain their majestic power and keep their status as walls of meat, but now it would be actually mechanically viable to hunt them, reigniting the interaction between them and carnivores and turn their gameplay into something a lot more engaging both for them and their predators. But what do you guys think? Would you enjoy playing sauropods in this way? Share your thoughts and opinions down below. A huge thank you to my Patreon supporters for supporting the channel and the content I create. If you want to join the ranks, you can do so for only $1 a month, the link will be in the description. Don't forget to leave your thoughts and opinions down below, join our Discord server for memes and paleo nut stuff, and I hope to see you all next week.